Hello, we're getting ready to start now. So we're going to finish our lesson on the pre-flood world. We talked last time about Eden, some of the effects of the fall, and a little bit about what the world pre-flood would have looked like. Now today we're going to finish up by focusing on some of the most notable creatures in the pre-flood world, dinosaurs. Now, if you've been following any kind of evolutionary creationist debates, papers, etc. in the last decade or so, whether or not dinosaurs had feathers is a big question. And so we're going to start with that today. Excuse me. And the first question is, what is a feather? It's basically an integumentary structure. And that is basically a skin structure. That's just integumentary is what they call skin. It's very similar to hair, and it is a hollow structure. Now, dissimilar to hair, it is made of only beta keratin. This is a protein. Hair and nails do have beta keratin, but they also have alpha keratin. And we can ID the difference between these two chemicals with protein analysis. There's also a few different kinds of feathers. A veined feather is what we usually think of when we think of a feather. What you find lying on the ground, what they used to write with back in the 1700s, that kind of feather on the right side there. But there's also a non-veined feather. You can see that in the bottom left. This is the downy fluff, the pillow stuffing that you'd want to use. And this basically is an insulator because birds tend to run hotter than most other animals. Humans are about 98 degrees. Dogs and cats are about 101 degrees, birds being about 102. And the last, the vein-only feathers. Now these are kind of like our eyelashes or the whiskers on a cat. They mainly are found near the face and seem to have the same function, a sensory function. Now, in the fossil record, evolutionists are trying to say that theropods, menoraptorans, and Archaeopteryx, they call it the first bird, all had feathers. And we do see a number of feathers in the fossil record. We see 8 different kinds of feathers. The ones circled there are the ones that are in dispute, but all these are found in the fossil record. The question is, did these creatures have these feathers? And you can see here a graph of the supposed feather types found on these creatures. Some, like the top, we have skin imprints, and we know that there was no feathers on them. Others, we have what we call filamentous feathers. Those are the downy ones. You have ones that are the shafted feathers, the ones that you think of a quill as, and even full wings on some of these. Now the question is this true? So we're going to look at a few examples. And the first one is the Eutyrannus and the Delongs. And the reason why these are grouped together is because they have supposedly the same kind of feather, the filamentous feather. Now, this is actually found along the bone, and both evolutionists and creationists argue that this is not really a feather, but just simply collagen. That in the decay process, before this was fossilized, the collagen basically was degraded and frayed, making it appear like that downy feather from before. And again, both evolutionists and creationists will say that this is not a feather. Most papers that you'll see on like creation.com, Answers in Genesis and like, are about these kinds of feathers. And they are very suspect. There's very little evidence to support that these were truly feathers. But there are other finds. The Ornithomimus. This is similar to the Gallimimus from Jurassic Park that were flocking around, that almost ran over the characters. This grouping is called bird mimics. That's what they were named. And they recently discovered something in Alberta, Canada, some skin samples, as well as some bones, that is remarked as the quality of preservation of the integumentary, the skin structures, including feathers. It is the first ornithomimid to preserve a tail bearing extensive plumiaceous feathers that are slightly more elongated in comparison to those present in the remainder of the body. However, the underside of the tail and the hind limbs distal to the middle of the femur appear to be devoid of plumage. And you can see some involvement with the femur there, or the leg bones there, and then the skin itself on that big plate. It's kind of hard to see, but it does seem that those are feathers. The evidence is piling up on that side of the debate. So it seems very likely that these creatures did have feathers this kind. But let's look a little bit more in depth. We have oviraptorids. This is previously known as an egg thief, but we later understood that it was its own nest that it was found with. And the position that it was found in was reconstructed, and you can see there on the bottom right that its legs are tucked, its arms are spread over the nest in a protective gesture, which, with everything going on in Noah's flood when it was killed, would be very scary, so it's understandable that's in this position. Now, it is displaying characteristics that are consistent with creatures with feathers. The birds will protect their nest, their brood, by putting their feathers, putting their wings over the nest. We see a very similar presentation here. So not only do these dinosaurs have representation of feathers, but they're also displaying characteristics of animals with feathers as well. Next, we have Microraptor. This seems to have feathers on its hind limbs and is about the size of a crow or raven. You can see a fossil as well as an artistic rendition of it in the bottom right. Now, some creationists will argue that since this had feathers, it was a bird. But we need to be careful that we don't make the same mistake that the evolutionary community is doing with their classification. They are classifying birds with dinosaurs because it fits their theory. So we need to make sure that we're not classifying creatures just so that it suits our theory as well. We don't tend to classify creatures based upon a single characteristic. Everything else with this lines up more with the dinosaur method of classification, the socketed teeth, the bones, everything else, everything we went over in the last lecture. And so it seems that this is a dinosaur, except that it seems to have feathers. And we know that these truly are feathers based upon the X-ray fluorescence. We can actually see what color they were based upon the melanosome structures in the bones. Feathers and bones are very much involved, as we'll see with our next creature. The Velociraptor. And no, it is not the big one. That is actually a Utahraptor. The reason why Jurassic Park was wrong is because they wanted a big raptor of some kind, and we didn't have that one discovered. So they just took the Velociraptor and pumped it up a few extra feet. But then a few years later, they found exactly what they wanted, but they didn't change the name. So we're talking about the Velociraptor, the small one there. You can see on the right some pictures of an ulna, that is the arm bone there that's connected to your elbow, of a turkey vulture. That is not the Velociraptor, that's a turkey vulture from C through F. You can see those little ulnar papules there in C and how they interact with the feathers in D. These basically are ligament attachments, and we know that if a creature has these, as demonstrated with A and B there, that they had feathers. Now, not all creatures with feathers have these, but every creature that has these had feathers. And so we're seeing a number of things of various kinds of support for certain dinosaurs, at least, having feathers. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this one. This one is a new creature that I'm not familiar with, but it's found in the late Jurassic sediments of China. I'm not talking about time, I'm talking about sedimentary layers with that. Now, this seems to have a huge crest of feathers around the skull and has been chemically tested to show that there is only beta carotene in there. Again, another dinosaur that has feathers. And the fact that we can test this to show that it was just beta carotene alone is actually a bigger problem that we'll get into next for the evolutionary theory. And last, Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx was supposed to be a mix of dinosaur and bird. That's what it was claimed to be when it was originally found. And it does have feathers. It's very notable that it does have feathers. But a lot of the bird features that it originally claimed to have, we're starting to question very much so. Both evolutionary and creation circles are. The supposed perching claw seems to be actually a broken claw. The mobile quadrant and even the ability of flight is heavily suspected. And many of the other supposed bird features are actually found in other dinosaur creatures as well. You can see there a list, and there are far more dinosaur-like features versus bird-like features. Now, do these feathers prove evolution? They seem to support that the theropods and other dinosaurs had either filamentous or full-blown feathers. And they are not accurate with everything they're pushing. The T-Rex, for example, you'll see in museums with feathers. We know for sure that it did not. We have skin impressions, so we need to be careful that we're not making the same mistakes. Not taking something and running with it. Not changing everything just to promote our theory or our idea. This is a little weird because I didn't grow up knowing that there could be feathers with dinosaurs. You know, first Jurassic Park, second Jurassic Park, third Jurassic Park, all the dinosaurs that I was involved with growing up didn't have feathers. And it is weird, but weird is okay. Because these are design features. Mammals have hair. All mammals have hair, technically, but in practice we don't. You will see elephants and rhinos have very little hair, mainly eyelashes. We know that they have the ability to have hair based upon woolly mammoths and woolly rhinos, but they don't really have hair. The whales and dolphins, again, technically they have hair, but in reality, no. In practice, no, they don't. Because hair is an insulator. Large creatures do not need hair because they don't have a big problem getting their body temperature to be controlled. Smaller creatures do. And we're seeing the large dinosaurs have skin imprints with no feathers. The smaller dinosaurs seem to have feathers, and it makes a perfect design sense. It doesn't matter, biblically speaking, if dinosaurs had feathers or not. So we need to make sure that when we are coming to something, coming to any question, that we're not simply saying no because the evolutionary community is saying yes. These feathers are fully functional, fully formed. They are not proto-feathers as they try to argue with the filamentous. They are feathers that we'd expect to see today. Fully formed, fully designed features. And so just because we have features that are in one group of animals as well as another, it doesn't matter. We need to make sure that we're approaching this trying to find the truth. And again, not just saying no because they're saying yes. So many of these, the filamentous, are heavy in question, but others are, there's pretty good evidence to support that they truly were feathers. And we went through some of those. But again, they are not aligning with the evolutionary theory just because they were feathers. We have them, but they're not in the order they want. We have them, but we also have them before the dinosaurs in the layers. So the layers deeper than the dinosaur layers have feathers, which means according to the evolutionary theory, they were before dinosaurs as well. So it doesn't fit that problem for them. It doesn't fit their supposed model as far as the tree that they try to connect everything with. And they're not proto-feathers. We're not seeing feathers developing. We're seeing fully formed feathers. And we do see a lot of creatures that have similar design characteristics. Just because we say all mammals have hair and all mammals give birth to live young, well, there are some exceptions to that. The key one being the platypus there. And so we need to make sure that we are coming to this trying to find truth and not just recoiling or reacting. Because remember, bird, dinosaur, and mammal are not biblical kinds. We like to group them that way just because man likes to group things. But even the Bible doesn't group them based upon dinosaur and mammal. And what the Bible calls bird, we wouldn't call bird. Because the Bible calls a bird anything that flies, which means a bat is a bird, but a penguin and ostrich is not. And so God doesn't even try to sort things into this kind of classification system. So we need to make sure that we are not causing too much of a rift over a man-made classification system and trying to hold truth in what it says. And the very fact that we can actually test these and find the beta keratin is actually a bigger problem for the evolutionary theory, and that's what we're going to be going into next. I'll give a few minutes for any questions that might come in, but then, or a few moments I should say, and then we'll go on to our next topic.
Got one.
Sure.
It says, there are large animals with lots of hair though. Woolly mammoths, polar bears, etc. Maybe not common, but they do exist.
They do. And it's all about the climate that they're in. The woolly mammoth and the woolly rhinos and all that, that was a very catastrophic climate, which we will get into here in about, I think, 3 weeks, Lord willing, maybe 4. And the polar bears, they are large. Not horribly large, but they are larger than most other bears. But look at the climate that they're in. It's fitting a function that they need, a design function they need. And so we don't think that there was that quite of a cold environment pre-flood. There could have been, but all the evidence we have tends to say no. And so that makes sense why the larger ones wouldn't. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions? Okay. And if you have any questions on this, please let me know. There are a ton of articles out there on both sides. It can be kind of daunting, all the information they have, but if you have any questions going through that, let me know. Next, we're going to talk about dinosaurs and some of the things that we're finding inside the fossils. And I have a question for you. Would the case for biblical creation be stronger if we found a living dinosaur today? If there was a long neck in the Amazon, a T-Rex in Africa, or a plesiosaur in Loch Ness, would that make the case for biblical creation that much more solid? Honestly, probably not. This has happened before, not with dinosaurs, but with other similar creatures, and they explain it away, the most notable being the coelacanth. This was a fish that supposedly, according to their theory, was involved in the transition from aquatic to terrestrial, so water to land creatures. They were supposed to have used those bottom fins to walk around on the bottom of shallow seas or rivers and stuff like that, and then that evolved into more terrestrial-like land appendages. Yet, this disappeared, according to evolutionary theory, before the dinosaurs did, and it was then found in, I think, the 1980s in the Indian Ocean, and it did nothing of what they predicted it to do. It is a deep-sea fish that doesn't use its fins for anything of walking or moving on the bottom. It just swims in the deep waters. And so it was promptly removed and new things were put in its place. The same thing for if a real living dinosaur appeared in modern day. But we have something better. The discovery of all these biomolecules, cells, and tissues basically holds them to a harder course of reality. Because the laws of chemistry and thermodynamics, are hard to break. They can't be broken, actually, because they're laws. And so it leaves them with a few kind of rescue devices. Either one, this material isn't there, which we're finding more and more of it every day. Bacterial contamination, which bacteria don't make a lot of these things we're finding. So they have to assume that it survived millions of years because it's there. And that is quite literally changing the theory to suit the facts. So now they're changing the fact that these materials can last millions of years because we see it in dinosaur bones when everything else is pointing to the contrary. And we'll get into some of that. But there are 14 short-lived dinosaur biomaterials found in all layers all over the world, even in peer-reviewed, evolutionary-based science journals. The first was found in 2005 by a Dr. Mary Schweitzer. She was taking a T-Rex bone, which is very large. I believe that was a picture of it on a slide a few slides ago. And it was too big to move. So they had to cut it in half. That's something they don't like to do with dinosaur bones because they don't have that many of them. But they had to do it in this case. So she took advantage of it and took a number of samples from inside the bone. And what she found looked just like that picture in the bottom right, underneath a mild magnification, and was actually found to be blood vessels. And this has then been found in a number of other dinosaur species. We also have red blood cells. This is what I expect to see when I go into work and make a blood smear. I'm sure Dr. John Christian has seen many such examples of this on the top right there. And so we have found these kind of cells, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, plus a number of others. And Dr. Schweitzer remarks, if you take a blood sample and you stick it on a shelf, you have nothing recognizable in about a week. So why would there be anything left in dinosaurs? To be able to preserve slides to look at for future use, it takes a large amount of processing. You have to do different chemicals, different stains, heat fixing, and even then they don't last very long, just a few years, maybe a decade or two. Now, Dr. Schweitzer is a secular scientist. She holds to the theory of evolution. Now, she ran into a number of problems trying to publish this. She ran the data several times herself before she even tried. And then when she tried to get it published, a reviewer denied her. She says, I had one reviewer tell me that he didn't care what the data said. He knew that what I was finding was impossible. She wrote back, well, what type of data would convince you? And the reviewer replied, none. This is the same hurdle that many creation scientists get into when they try to publish in these secular studies, these secular papers. And you will hear people say, if they actually had good data, they'd get published. This points to the contrary. All these examples that we're going to go into will point to the contrary because people have gotten fired over some of these findings. Next is hemoglobin. This is the protein that carries oxygen in your blood, and it contains iron, and that's why it looks red. Well, in this skeleton here, we have this mosasaur. It was a natural mummy, meaning we can see the skin pulled back against the bones, but we also see this area of hemoglobin. In the bottom, you can see a little dark area in the center, and it's zoomed up on the top right. This seems to be a little collection of hemoglobin, and it is at the exact position where we'd expect a creature of a similar shape to have its heart. And they look for many reasons why this could have been collected in this area, and they have none. So what it seems to be is that this creature died, there was blood in its heart that then was integrated and is present there still to this day, We also have bone cells. And while bone cells can survive the entire life of an organism, they can't survive that long outside. We have this Triceratops horn that was found by a Dr. Kevin Anderson. I do believe he works for creation.com, but I could be mistaken. Maybe it's Answers in Genesis. But he found this horn in Montana. And it was pretty large, about 4 foot long. And it was found about a foot underneath the surface. He just had to dig a little bit to get this. And that means that this bone was exposed to the elements, exposed to the heat and cold cycles, exposed to the water. And if you want to break down organic material, hot and cold cycles with water is the fastest and best way of doing that. So it makes very little sense how this could have survived for millions of years. It's surprising that it survived thousands of years. We also have collagen. Collagen is very temperature sensitive because that's how we make Jell-O, is we boil it. We found this in 2007, and they did not like what they found, so they took 10 years and a number of labs to finally convince them that this truly was collagen. The supposed theoretical maximum life for collagen is 300,000 to 900,000 years underneath the best possible conditions. There's no way to get these to last for millions of years. The same for DNA. Should last about 10,000 years at best if kept cold. And we have this in a number of creatures. We also have the histones. These are the proteins that DNA wraps around. Bacteria do not make these. This cannot be from bacterial contamination. Only multicellular organisms have these. And again, can't last millions of years. The keratin that we talked about before, the beta keratin and alpha keratin when discussing the feathers, that can't last that long. Now they try to make a number of rescue devices, such as the clay mixing in with the keratin, making it last longer. The problem is the water would bring in the clay, and water would make it last not as long. So even their rescue devices don't actually answer all the questions and make a number of other problems. So they've made a number of attempts to try and explain this away. Cross-linking of red blood cell proteins doesn't work. Iron as a preserving agent, mistaken as a carcass, so a bird died or something like that, and that's what we're actually finding, mistaken for the dinosaur. Lab contamination, so from the people working on it, and even bacterium biofilms. None of this actually fits the problem. We're finding too much of it everywhere. And the biochemists, the evolutionary biochemists, are the ones that are arguing the most, because this is their field of expertise. The survival of these chemicals is what they deal with. And they know that there's no way for these chemicals to last that long. So they are just saying, it's not real, it's not real, it's not real. They are very eager to dismiss these findings, and that's why you will not really see many evolutionary sources talking about them, or at least talking about what they do, what this means. We have these 14 materials, again, both in secular papers and in non-secular papers, both in creationist papers as well. But when they do print this, they don't say, okay, this is what this means. They just print it and leave it there. They don't say, okay, this means that it must have lasted, but they don't have a good mechanism for that. This means that the timelines change. No, they don't want to do that because they need to hold to the theory of evolution. And you can see that some people were fired, and some people do not want to accept it until they have a mechanism for preservation. This is a very intriguing, a very interesting, and very bad for the theory of evolution. They have no explanation for this. This is some very strong evidence to suggest that dinosaurs lived relatively recently. It's surprising that it lasted thousands of years. Noah's flood was about 4,500 years ago, give or take. And it's surprising that it lasted that long. These materials degrade very, very quickly. But it's by no means a stretch of the imagination to get it to last that long. And it is impossible with everything we know today for it to last millions of years. Any questions on this before we go on to our final subject? Now the last is dinosaurs and man. If dinosaurs lived pre-flood, we know that they were taken on the ark since Noah took all the land creatures. And there should have some evidence after the flood. Well, we don't expect to find fossils because fossils are only made under very specific situations. The flood is a primary one. Flooding is a very easy way to make fossils. But we don't expect to find many, if any. And if we do find them, they can be explained away by various numbers of mechanisms. And there are a number of resources at the back that will go into those, but that's beyond our topic for right now. But if they lived alongside man, we'd expect to find some sort of reference to them. And we do. We have a collection of historical documents that are extremely old, extremely well confirmed, that go through a number of mentions of dinosaurs as well as a few descriptions. And that is the Bible. We have others, but we're going to focus on the Bible first. So the word dinosaur is not in the Bible. It is commonly, the word tannin is what's used, and that's translated as either great sea serpents, as in, I think this is the ESV I have at the top there, sea monster, or dragon. The word dinosaur came about in about the 1800s, and the Bible's already been translated in English well before then. And the word dinosaur is a very specific word. Remember, we went through the characteristics of what defines a dinosaur. It wouldn't describe the flying ones or the sea ones or a number of other large reptiles, only a very specific group. So a more encompassing word like dragon is a better translation for the word tannin. And so we'll go through some explanations, some mentions of dinosaurs and dinosaur-like creatures in the Bible. The most notable is behemoth. You can see some of the descriptions listed in Job 40 there. Excuse me. Called first in the ways of God, moves tail like a cedar, power in his stomach, eats grass like an ox, sinew of thighs are tightly knit, bones are beams of bronze, ribs like bars of iron. Now some will try to claim that this is an elephant or hippo. You may have little footnotes in your Bible that say elephant, hippo, or something like that. And while they do overlap to some extent, some not really, and some just plain don't match at all. The most notable being the cedar and the tail comparison. Now, unless you're talking about a year-old sapling of a cedar, it's not going to look like an elephant's tail. And even that's not going to look like a hippo's tail. You can see that it doesn't really fit. A better fit would be a sauropod dinosaur. The femurs are actually tubes. They have the exterior being hard bone and its interior being spongified bone, more of a mesh. The ribs are the only fully calcified bone in the sauropod. You can see all the comparisons there in the bottom left, or at least some of the comparisons. This creature had a 150-foot kill zone. If you got that close to this thing, it could kill you. And it was very, very well designed. And what's most notable is we have never found a sauropod tail skid mark, meaning that it walked, swaying its tail from side to side. And we can even see some muscle attachments that would confirm this. So this fits as best as we can understand, since we have never, at least I have never seen a living sauropod, everything described in Job 40. The next one, in Job 41, Leviathan, is very well described as well. But there are some things that just don't match to what we understand in the fossil record. The most notable being the snorting flash forth light. Eyelids are like the eyelids of the morning. And it seems to have some sort of fiery component to it, potentially even breathing fire. But because it's listed with other known animals, and behemoth matching a creature in the fossil record to a T, it is very likely this was a real creature as well. So what about shooting fire? There's not many that do it today, but we do have an example with the bombardier beetle. This is a chemical burning, and it's loud and accurate. There are very few that do this, and this obviously is not Leviathan, but it is a design feature that could have been more popular, more in use in later times. And this obviously would not be a dinosaur. It does not fit the description of a dinosaur as far as like walking, land animal, that kind of thing. And a better description may be a fire-breathing dragon. We have two things in the fossil record that would be kind of close. The Sarcosuchus imperator and the Leopleurodon. Now you will find a number of articles promoting one or the other, but they don't match perfectly because we don't have any evidence of any kind of fire-producing glands, sacs, or soft tissue. But soft tissue doesn't preserve very well in the fossil record. We have mainly the bones. And there are at least a few articles that try to go into the skull shape of the Sarcosuchus, trying to hint that it may have had that function, because it does have a slightly different skull than a modern-day crocodile. But in short, we don't know. There are some potential candidates for what Leviathan would be from our modern understanding. But we have others. The fiery flying serpents of Isaiah. The fiery here may be more poison or venomous, since venom does burn usually. And so it could be that, or it could truly be fire breathing, like with Leviathan. We have just plain old fiery serpents that didn't fly. And a number of other mentions of dinosaur or dinosaur-like creatures in the Bible. And this is what we expect if dinosaurs existed after the flood, and the Bible being written with accurate dates and descriptions. But we also have secular and historical accounts outside the Bible. We have this discovery. This is a secular page that says, there is one creature remembered in the legends of almost every human culture that ever existed, a creature depicted with remarkable similarity by the Chinese, the Aztecs, and even the Inuit, who live in a frozen land where no reptiles are found. Even they have stories of this animal. Cultures from different continents, people who have no contact with one another, yet all of them have stories describing the same mythical animal. Every continent, every culture seems to have some similar, very similar representations of dragon-like creatures. And we see this in history as well. One of the oldest stories, Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, he encounters a huge vicious dragon. And as far as not being stories, we have Herodotus, called the father of history, in the 5th century BC. He records, winged serpents are said to fly from Arabia at the beginning of the spring, making for Egypt. But the ibis birds encounter the invaders in this pass and kill them. The serpents are like water snakes. Their wings are not feathered, but very like the wings of a bat. We have Alexander the Great, who notes that there were some Indians worshipping huge hissing reptiles that they kept in caves. Pliny the Elder, this is in the 1st century AD, he was a Roman scholar and historian who did go into dinosaur-like creatures. We have Cassius Dio. He's noted how the Romans attacked and killed, a Roman army attacked and killed a 120-foot long dinosaur-like creature, a dragon. We have Marco Polo, who says, here are found snakes and huge serpents, 10 paces in length and 10 spans in girth, 50 feet long and 100-inch in girth. At the forepart, near the head, they have 2 short legs, each with 3 claws, as well as eyes larger than a loaf, and very glaring. The jaws are wide enough to swallow a man, the teeth are large and sharp, and their whole appearance is so formidable that neither man or any kind of animal can approach them without terror. Others are of smaller size, being 8, 6, or 5 paces long. And we have a historian in the 1500s who wrote a scientific book about animals, and some of them in there we would call dinosaurs today. And in the 1600s, we have the historian Kircher saying, of winged dragons, disputes have only arisen between authors, most of whom declare them to be fanciful. But these authors are contradicted by histories and eyewitnesses. Winged dragons, small, great, and greatest, have been produced in all times in every land. And even up to the 20th century, there were explorers and natives in Africa that reported sighting dinosaur-like creatures. We have a number of reports and descriptions, more than this as well, but we see them declining in the 1500s and 1600s. At that time, the idea of extinction was not held to. The thought that God's creation could be no more, even in a form of an animal, they just did not hold to that. They thought that was not possible, that God wouldn't allow it. And so when we hear stories of a creature but see no evidence of the creature, they then began to say it was mythical. And then in the 1800s, when we began finding dinosaur bones that would fit some of these descriptions, we then make no connection. And part of that is because at that time in the 1800s, the idea of long ages was becoming more and more popular. And so that is why there is a disconnect there. But we have more than written record. We have images. We have this pigment in the Amazon rainforest. It was dated to be about 300 or 3,300 years ago. I don't hold to that date because, remember, dating after a certain point, after about the 1400s, even with carbon dating, doesn't fit very well. But this is definitely post-flood. We have descriptions or a drawing of a stegosaur there in a temple in Cambodia. They think they may have found another one as well as being surrounded by real creatures. Excuse me. We have this mosaic, this 1st century BC mosaic of the Nile. You can see a close-up there in the bottom left, as well as a more zoomed out version in the top right. The Greek there calls this creature a crocodile leopard. And there are other real creatures in this mosaic. In the fossil record, we have this creature in the bottom right. I'm not going to try to pronounce that, but it looks just like the image there, and I could call that a crocodile leopard. It looks like a body of a cat, but with the skin and appearance of a crocodile. We have a number of petroglyphs in the US and Americas. Now, some of these are very intricate. You can see their spines, the giant creature in the top right, but some of them can be kind of crude. We have just a few drawings here, but it could potentially be a duck-billed dinosaur of sorts. We don't really have any creatures that would match this description. We have some that you can see here that seem to be some sort of pterosaur, and others with a long neck. The long neck is the most notifiable because we don't have creatures with a long neck and a long tail like that in the modern era. And so whenever we see that, it's surprising that we would have that in images. We also have that in Egyptian history. We have the Namur plate there. We also have it in Australia. We have the Aborigines there. They report of hunting and killing this creature. They call it a yaru because it killed one of their kinsmen. In northern England, we have this depiction here. I'm hoping you can see it, but it's a long neck that seems to have some 4 spikes on its tail. And this is interesting because long necks don't have spikes on its tail. Oh wait, no, they do. We actually found this in the fossil record, that a long neck with spikes on its tail. And so it matches this description to a T. We have a number of others. We have the Ishtar Gate in Babylon, this dragon here. We have, again, some more long necks in Syria, as well as a number of others. And these are just a few. There are a lot of depictions of dinosaur and dinosaur-like creatures. Some can be explained away as contamination or as forgeries. There are a lot of forgeries out there. But with further information, further study, they can be shown to be forgeries or not. And some of them are very obvious to be dinosaurs. And so we have a lot of evidence to show that dinosaur and man existed together. There's more in the resources there at the back. So for this lesson, we talked about life in Eden. We don't really know a lot. Most of what we know comes from the Bible. We can have a few ideas from our science and understanding of the world today, but the Bible is by far the more accurate interpretation, or not interpretation, accurate idea of what was going on at the time. We went through the fall and how approaching things with the fall in mind will give us much better ideas of how to interpret pathology, how to approach disease, how to approach a lot of the problems we see in our modern world. We talked about the pre-flood world, the shape of the land, the kind of creatures that was far more diverse than today. And even the creatures that existed at the time, the same kinds, may not be recognizable. The dog kind and the cat kind may not look like what we see running around our houses. They still would have been a dog or a cat, but God put a lot of diversity into these creatures. They were still a dog and cat, but they maybe looked more wolf-like and less pug-like. Or the cat may have been more like a mountain lion versus the house cat we have here. And so it would have been a very strange world, at least for us today. We talked about how dinosaurs, how it's okay for them to have feathers because we don't need to worry if dinosaurs have feathers. The Bible doesn't say dinosaurs did or didn't have feathers. It's okay for multiple design features to be in multiple kinds. Just because we sort cars with 4 wheels and boats with no wheels, if a car has the same seating coating, the same pleather or whatever you want to use as a boat, it doesn't mean anything. It just means that God decided to use the same design in 2 separate creatures, 2 separate kinds. And the fact that we can find biological components in the dinosaurs, even DNA, and before you get ahead of me, no, we're not going to get Jurassic Park. The DNA is degraded, but it's still recognizable as DNA. The fact that we can find these is a major problem for the evolutionary theory and shows that dinosaurs did exist relatively close to the modern era. And since we're finding these in all layers, it means the layers were formed relatively close to the modern era, which is very consistent with the biblical model of Noah's flood. And we will be going through Noah's flood over the next 2 to 3 weeks, both the actual event itself as well as the effects of it, because the effects did last for several hundred years post-flood. And it may be why we don't find many dinosaurs today, because that was a very harsh climate at the time. There was a lot of death, a lot of mass extinctions. As far as resources, I have a number of pages, but I do have more if you have any questions about this. So here's the first page. You'll find a lot of information as far as just dinosaurs in general. And then the second page is why we don't find human and dinosaur fossils together. We do find some evidence of that in the fossil record, but it was a bit more in depth, and I just wanted to save time, so it's here if you want to get more involved with that. If there's any questions coming in from online?
Yep. I want to ask, could you define the term dinosaur, and are you using it to mean a prehistoric extinct creature?
It is extinct. Sorry,
I'll fix it up.
so read it out loud.
I did read it out loud.
Read it louder.
Could you please define the term dinosaur? Are you using it to describe a prehistoric extinct creature?
It is an extinct creature from what we can tell today, but based upon all these records of it, you can see here just some of them, definitely not prehistoric, though they did exist prehistory as well. We have records of it in the histories. But I'm trying to get back to the slide that they used to define dinosaurs. And this is basically just because of the features within them. Sorry, there's a lot of clicking going on. Flash warning. There we go. So a dinosaur is any creature that fits these design characteristics. Having a pelvis with a crest on top of the hip, the humerus with a deltopectoral crest, an S shape with a fourth trochanter on the femur, an expanded neural arch, socketed teeth, and anteorbital fenestra. These are the holes in the skull there, and walking upright. So any creature that fits these characteristics would have been called a dinosaur. And so that is what I mean when I say dinosaur. I know it's a very intricate term, but we would have had some creatures that we would call dinosaurs today if you're not in a scientific field, like a pterodactyl, mosasaur, the one that swims in the water, even land reptiles like a dimetrodon. I don't believe that would have been counted as a dinosaur because of the way it walked. Its bones didn't work the same way. So I'm not saying large reptiles, but I'm saying we have classified these creatures based upon these design features. Not meaning that they're related, just because we like to organize things and then argue about it. And so that's what I mean by dinosaur. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions coming in?
Yeah, so it says, it seems like all we hear about are dinosaur bones. I see all scientists worldwide find as many other animals across all species.
Yes. And so we find mammals and bird-like creatures. We assume that they're birds since they find the feathers. I have not gone into that, so I can't say for sure. But we find creatures that we expect to find today in all layers. Most of the fossils we find, though, and we'll get into this when we talk about Noah's flood, are, I think 95% are aquatic creatures. Of the remains of that 5%, 95% of that are plants. And so of the remains of that, very few are vertebrate fossils. Very few are the fossils that we really like dinosaurs, mammals, and birds, and all that. Most are clams and coral and stuff you'll find in your driveway in the limestone there. And so there's not really a lot that we have as far as fossils go for these kind of creatures, which is why they don't like to break them. But now that they're starting to break them, since we know there's some interesting things inside, we're going to get more and more information. They're actually going back and taking a peek in some of the fossils that we have previously found to see if there's anything in there, and they are finding a lot of biological material. Hope that answers the question. Any other questions?
Yeah.
All right. And again, if you think of anything as you're going through this, let me know. I'd love to talk to anyone about this more. There's a lot of material on this. I hope I got it narrowed down to some interesting tidbits, but there's a lot more you can go into depth on this. Thank you.